Good morning. Good morning and welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist Society of Albany. My name is John Newell, and I am the Service Associate for today. Before we begin, those on Zoom should please check to make sure your microphone is muted. You can also turn off your camera if your image is potentially distracting. Please also be mindful of your speech while on Zoom, as microphones can accidentally become unmuted. This will minimize any disruption to our service. You will notice closed captioning at the bottom of your screen. If you'd like to access that, please find the CC option on your Zoom toolbar and select the arrow to choose that setting. Thanks for your cooperation for folks on Zoom. This morning, we welcome to our pulpit the Reverend Dr. Stan Sears, who is a retired UU minister. Dr. Sears holds degrees from the University of South Carolina, the University of Chicago, that's the big one, and Meadville Lombard Theological School. He has served congregations in California, British Columbia, Colorado, Pennsylvania, the state of New York, and in Vermont. He is in the process of moving to Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, where after 14 years of a commuting relationship, he and his wife, Carolyn Christie, a retired Second Flute in the Montreal Symphony and professor at McGill, will finally consolidate into one home. You may wonder, I've introduced the gentleman, he's not here, but you will hear him before you see him. Go.
Good morning. May this be a time of enrichment, a time of being together as one, both physically and virtually. Let us emerge from our separate spaces and places as we feel and share the energy and love that we possess as a beloved community. May this be a time of replenishment and healing as we come together and make manifest the presence of Unitarian Universalism here in this community. May we be one.
Our prelude this morning is I'm Going to Be, or 500 Miles, by Craig and Charlie Reed. It will be presented by Elena Karpov.
When I wake up, well, I know I'm gonna be your door.
Please join in the chalice lighting with the words which will appear on the screen. Welcoming all free seekers of truth and meaning, we gather to excite the human spirit, to inspire its growth and development, to respond morally and ethically to a troubled world, and to sustain a vital and nurturing religious community. Next, we'll sing a unison song. The words will appear on the screen. Please join in singing "Morning Has Come" by Jason Sheldon. We will be led by Elena Karpov. Okay, if the children will come forward, or anybody else really curious, the wisdom story is something that very few people know about. How does a bagpipe really work? And it will be presented by Reverend Sears on account of, I have no idea.
I'm thankful to John for helping out here. It'd be difficult to hold on to the pipes and show you everything while holding a microphone in my hand. Okay, so I'm sure that many of you have heard bagpipes, or seen them in parades. But how does a bagpipe actually work? So, okay, what distinguishes a bagpipe are the drones. You hear that sound in the background. Well, once you have air in the bag, it's easy from there. Just have to keep the bag full and keep getting air into it. So, the anatomy of the bagpipe. How do you get the air in? Monsieur blow piece. You blow in, and you see that keep the bag under your arm so that it can fill up and you can hold it and keep applying pressure. That gets the drums going. Now, you see a bag. This is a clergy green tartan. But as you can see, there's a hole at the end of the bag, as well as numerous other holes for the drones and blowpiece and the chanter. So underneath, the risque part of how a bagpipe works is the bag, which in this case is calf skin. Other times people are using Gore-Tex or sheepskin. It depends on the animal or your ethics. And then, so we have the drones. That humming sound in the background. You have 3 reeds. Each of the reeds, you have 2 that are called tenor, which are tuned to 1 octave below the bottom note on the chanter, and the bass guy, which is 2 octaves below. Now, it would be pretty boring if you just were walking around and listening to drone. So you have what's called the chanter. And again, you have another reed. Now, for those of you who aspire to learning the bagpipes, you don't have to buy the full regalia to begin. You start with a practice chanter, which has the chanter, so you learn the fingerings and a little blow part and a very easy reed. See? So that is how a bagpipe works. And this is how you learn the bagpipes, using a practice chanter until you build up enough wind and save up enough money to buy the pipes. So I'll be looking forward. If anybody has questions about pipes after the service, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you very much for listening.
Say that again louder. Oh, why is it called a bagpipe? We have a question from the audience.
It's called a bagpipe because there's a bag. And the bag supplies the air for the pipes. So that's why I call it a bagpipe.
Well, now you have just had the experience of learning what the pipes are. They are they're pipes with reeds, which make the noise, and then the pipe determines the note. And with that, the children may now go to their classrooms. Thank you for being here. We now welcome our viewers from Facebook who will be joining us now for the service. My name is John Newell, and I'm the service associate today. We welcome to our pulpit Reverend Dr. Stan Sears, who's a retired minister and bagpiper.
My reading this morning is taken from Robert Burns' poem, The Kirk's Alarm. It's not the full poem, but it gives you a flavor for it. Orthodox, orthodox, why believe in John Knox? Let me sound an alarm to your conscience. There's a heretic blast has been blown to the west, that what is not sense must be nonsense. Dr. Mac, you should stretch on a rack to strike evildoers with terror, to join faith and sense upon any pretense is heretic, damnable error. Dalrymple mild, though your heart's like a child and your life like the new driven snow, yet that will not save you. Old Satan must have you for preaching that three's ain and trois. Calvin's sons, seize your spiritual guns. Ammunition you never can need. Your hearts are the stuff, will be powder enough and your skulls are storehouses of lead. At this time, let us pause for a moment. Imagine you're self-centered. Whether it's in your heart, in your head, feel that part of you that is most alive. That energy that flows within you. That sense of compassion for others. Let us turn our thoughts to the people of Ukraine who are enduring this horrendous, dare we call it sinful invasion. Let us turn our thoughts to refugees fleeing not just from Ukraine, but from other places in the world. Let us ask ourselves what we can do to make this a more compassionate, a more civilized, a more hopeful world. Let us turn our thoughts to legislatures, not just here in Albany, but in other places across our country where totally uncompassionate, discompassionate laws are being promulgated, persecuting women, criminalizing health care. Let us ask ourselves, what can we do to make this more civilized? To spread liberty and freedom so that people can exercise control and sovereignty over their own bodies. And let us turn our thoughts to friends and family members who may be in hospital or who are in care situations. May they know health and healing. For people who are going through cancer treatments, may they find cures. For these and for all the other cares, concerns, worries, and anxieties that tug at our hearts and keep us awake at night, let us turn to the silence of our individual prayers and meditations. until my first year of seminary, Robert Burns was an obscure Scottish poet who wrote in a language that was, well, sort of like English, but there were words that didn't appear in the language of the other 18th century British poets. Since I started seminary 2 years after starting bagpipes, I was just learning about high holidays or high holy days, such as Robert Burns night dinners. Dinners that I would celebrate in various congregations during my ministerial career. And I'm grateful to those congregations for indulging me in this annual festive event. I justified it by pointing out that January 25th, Burns' birthday, he was born in 1759, actually appeared on the official Unitarian Universalist calendar. So it was a kosher Unitarian Universalist holiday to celebrate. And he is part of our lineage, though he was not specifically a Unitarian Universalist. Now, of course, there were parishioners through the years who complained that I was doing this merely to subject them to the bagpipes twice a year. The first time was on Homecoming Sunday when I piped the children around the church. And the second time was in January when we would hold Burns dinners, or I would preach on a different Burns poem or theme every year. Now, all of this was because on a cold, wintry Chicago night in 1978, I believe, while I was walking through the stacks of the Meadville Lombard Library, I came across a small book on the history of Scottish Unitarianism. And there was a chapter in there on Robert Burns and the Ayrshire Heretics. Well, as a bagpiper, I decided I have to read this chapter. And so I sat down and read it and realized, oh my God, there's a connection. Well, the Ayrshire Heretics were Reverend Doctors William McGill and William Dalrymple. In the reading that I shared earlier, Dr. Mack was Dr. McGill, and Dalrymple Mild was William Dalrymple. They were the ministers of Burns' home church in the town of Ayr. It's on the west coast of Scotland. Now, before you set your travel plans to go and celebrate a Unitarian service on a Sunday morning in Ayr, I have to be honest and tell you that it's not a Unitarian church. As a fellow piper pointed out to me, someone who had been to that church, it's Church of Scotland, or Presbyterian, we would call it. Well, that's the reason why they call them the Ayrshire Heretics, because their views were heretical to the Calvinist views of the day. They embraced ideas that were probably more at home in a Unitarian or a Universalist church, and they were actually both in Britain at that time. Or at least the Universalism was beginning, and there were Unitarian churches. Now, moreover, one could say that Burns' poetry contains elements of both Unitarianism and Universalism. That's why I consider him to be one of the early prophets of Unitarian Universalism. Burns' relationship with the Ayrshire Heretics began when Dalrymple baptized Burns when he was 1 day old. McGill was the associate minister of the church. McGill gained notoriety when he published a book on the death of Jesus Christ. Well, for publishing the book, he was brought up on heresy charges. And what he did, as so many heretics often do, and so many who are persecuted for religious reasons do, is he recanted while he was going through the trial. Once they cleared him and said, okay, you're clear, you can go back to your church. He went back to the church and continued preaching what he'd always preached. So that's one of the reasons that Burns, leapt to his defense and wrote about him. Both Dalrymple and McGill were what would be called New Light reformers, and what was arguably the most conservative of the European Protestant churches. A professor in graduate school said that Scotland was the most orthodox of Protestant churches and the most economically impoverished at the time. I've also heard Scots folk singer Brian McNeil of the Battlefield, formerly of the Battlefield Band, describe it as a religion so cold it could freeze up the blood in their hearts. Now, as New Light ministers, McGill and Dalrymple represent the Enlightenment with its emphasis on rationalism. Their opponents, the Old Light ministers, were the conservatives who held to a strictly orthodox interpretation, and particularly John Calvin's concept of predestination. Predestination means that you don't really get to decide what you're going to do with your life. God's already made that decision for you. You're predestined. So if you're predestined to have a good life, you're considered to be among the elect. The aim to heaven versus the 10 to hell. So the elect were considered favored by God, not only religiously, but economically. So Burns was not of the predestination school of thought. His position was clear. He defended both men ardently, and he believed that people did have an inherent goodness in them. Even if you weren't born wealthy, you could do something with your life. And that's where we come to the new voice blowing out of the West. It's blasting out. What does not make sense is nonsense. He fires another volley again near the end of that stanza when he says, the Calvinists have no need for ammunition. Your hearts are the stuff, will be powder enough, and your skulls are storehouses of lead. He was not very kind and gentle. When he saw the persecution that was going on, he countered it with his rapier wit. Now, one can almost feel the repercussions more than 200 years after those words were published. Burns was clearly challenging that central concept of predestination, of the elect. In the elect, in that whole concept, Burns went at it again in another poem called Address to the Uncogid, or the Rigidly Righteous. A parishioner who was born in Scotland told me the term translates to the uncommonly good. Burns writes, "Oh, ye who are so good yourself, so pious and so holy, ye've naught to do but mark and tell your neighbor's faults and folly." And then Burns goes on to challenge them to look at their own lives, to acknowledge their own imperfections, not to be so self-righteous, but to admit that we're all imperfect. But we shouldn't be chastising those who are less fortunate than ourselves, those who are different. Now, this is something that we still see, today in our own world. Think of how many times you've heard one of the megachurch or televangelists or religiously self-important people talk about how we need to have strict laws when it comes to reproductive rights. Think of how they so often talk about sexual morality. Well, sure, I've had colleagues who have been brought up on charges for sexual immorality. But think of how often it happens among those who are most vociferous about it. When I hear a televangelist talking about that stuff, I ask, let's see how long it takes to see them brought up on charges or to have the affairs publicized. Ronald Reagan was the first president to really take advantage of what we call the religious right. In fact, it seems like the religious right rose to power when Reagan rose to power. He was also our first divorced president. So I would add, don't just look at who is scorned, look at who is forgiven. There's a reason why our prisons are filled with people of color, and most incarcerated whites come from impoverished backgrounds. We're quick to forgive the wealthy, but the poor and people of color often endure the longest sentences in the harshest conditions. This inflated self-importance is rampant throughout Burns' poetry. Another one of his famous poems is "To a Louse on Seeing One on a Woman's Bonnet in Church on a Sunday Morning." Now, you can imagine the woman sitting there in church with her fancy, and it's a Lunardi bonnet, which I learned was he was kind of like the Ralph Lauren of his day, so to speak. And there's this louse dancing on the bonnet. You imagine doing a jig. Here I am, look at me, I'm this mighty louse. And the woman's thinking, she's unaware that there's a louse dancing on her bonnet, and everybody's looking at her. And she thinks, oh, they're looking at my bonnet. No, lady, they're looking at that louse dancing on it. So, when you take yourself so seriously and inflated self-importance, it's like we need to call ourselves to our humanity. We see this hypocrisy playing out in one of Burns' most famous satires. It's called Holy Willie's Prayer. Now, Holy Willie was an elder of the church in Ayr. He was also a renowned voyeur. He was, when people would point out What's Holy Willie doing outside our window? He would say, I'm monitoring. I'm making sure that you're not engaging in sinful behavior in the privacy of your homes. And so Burns decided that Holy Willie was worthy of a good satire. Well, it turned out that Holy Willie, like our self-righteous televangelist, had an affair with an underage woman. And so Holy Willie, being a righteous person, filled with moral rectitude, decided that he would confess his sin in the privacy of the church where he thought he was alone. But we imagine Burns sitting in the back of the church, unbeknownst to Holy Willie, taking notes. And so Burns wrote a poem about Holy Willie. O thou, wha in the heavens dost dwell, wha as it pleases best thyself, sends ane to heaven and 10 to hell, all for thy glory, and not for any good or ill they've done it for thee. So it doesn't matter what you've done with your life. You're either one of the 1%ers or you're going to hell. That's the type of theology that Burns was attacking and the hypocrisy of it. Now, although it's a bit of a stretch to listen to Scott's words, the message is clear. If there is a God, it will not be a God who is so vain as to create people just to adore it and condemning the vast majority to endless suffering. Rather, it will be a God who is not afraid of our thoughts, of the human imagination. It'll be a compassionate one who sees a purpose in creation and, in good universalist fashion, favors hope, not hell. Oh, by the way, Holy Willie had an unfortunate fate. He died by the side of a road on a winter night, apparently with too much of what we will call antifreeze in his body. Now, although Burns predeceased Holy Willie by a decade, his disdain for Holy Willie was so strong that he went so far as to publish an epitaph on Holy Willie. Obviously, published long before Holy Willie's actual demise, Burns describes Holy Willie as being placed in his grave and then taking an immediate left turn to join his soulmate, the devil, in hell. Now, what stands out in all of Burns' poetry is his empathy for the common person. Although he was lauded as Scotland's national poet by the time that he was in his mid-30s, he never lost contact with the farmers and workers who drove the industrial machine and worked the land. I will point out that Adam Smith, known for being the father of capitalist economics, was one of his contemporaries teaching in Edinburgh, where Burns loved to spend his time. Burns remains the most renowned of the Scottish poets and is fondly referred to as the Bard in toast on Burns nights because he knew the frustration of working the craggy Scottish soil from the time that he was a child. Burns was not born to the manor, as they say. He clearly wasn't one to be counted among the elect. His father, William Burns, was a tenant farmer who moved the family, when he could find a place where the soil was more hospitable to his efforts. Although he was not a wealthy man, he hired a tutor to teach his children math and reading. And I remember reading that the elder Burns told the tutor that the children were not to memorize anything until they could explain it. Burns was a voracious reader. He devoured the classics and Scottish poetry. And by the time he was 17, he started writing poems in his commonplace book. English teachers refer to Burns as a pre-romantic. Actually, he's probably an incurable romantic. Burns would write love poems to girlfriends to try to entice them, and he was quite successful at this. His love life was legendary. Jean Armour, who eventually became his wife, bore him several children in the years of their on-again, off-again engagement. Her parents saw him as a starving poet until his book started selling. And during that time, he made plans to emigrate to Jamaica with yet another woman, Highland Mary Campbell, who died before their voyage. So he went back to Jean, they married and lived or cohabited successfully thereafter. But Burns, as I said, acknowledged, his imperfections. He acknowledged, the absurdity of his libido, we could say. And in one case, the woman who was not his wife bore a child the day after Jean Armour bore yet another Burns child. And the other woman died in childbirth. So Burns and Jean brought the child into their family and raised her as their own. This event was memorialized in The Poet's Welcome to His Ill-Begotten Daughter. And again, he displays his humility and humanity in this self-deprecating passage where he writes, "Good grant that thou may I inherit thy mother's person, grace and merit, and thy poor worthless daddy's spirit without his failings. 'Twill please me more to see and hear of it than stocket mailings." Stocket mailings refers to a cupboard full of food. It is this touch of humanity that has endeared Burns to Scots readers as well as people the world over. He not only acknowledged his faults and failings, but he was willing to laugh at himself. One of the rousing songs, and Burns wrote over 360 songs, was "The Deal's a While with the Excisement." Again, there's some irony in here. When the Scottish government realized that their greatest poet was working himself into the grave by trying to be a farmer, which he clearly wasn't suited to, they decided to give him a sinecure, which was to be a tax collector. Now, in The Deal's a While with the Excisement, Burns tells a tale of the devil fiddling into town. The two instruments of the devil in classic literature are the bagpipes and the fiddle. So in The Deal's a While with the Excisement, the devil fiddles into town, takes the excisement and fiddles out of town. Kind of like St. Patrick. Now, I believe that Burns lives on because he captured the essence of a good and spirited life in his poetry. Although he died before he was 38, he lived a very full life. He loved his country and his people and celebrated their honesty and virtues, even as he lampooned their absurd theology and their foolishness. It is no coincidence that Scotland has two national anthems, both written by Burns, Auld Lang Syne and Scots Wha Hae with Wallace Bled, which is a stirring tribute to William Wallace, the Scots hero portrayed in the movie Braveheart. Now, I enjoy preaching on Burns because he calls us to theological honesty and humility. He tells us, get rid of your pretentiousness, be honest, and see the difference between sense and nonsense. The God that he describes is a gentle being, abundant in loving kindness. It is a God who loves the common folk and is loved in return by those who have not been showered with worldly wealth. As I mentioned, Burns had an ability to come up with pithy sayings or lines wherever he went, and he would often leave them when he stayed someplace or went to a dinner. One famous one is the Selkirk Grace, which again is believed to be something that he adapted. And it's called the Selkirk Grace because he recited it at a dinner at Lord Selkirk's mansion. And some of you may have heard it. It's, some have meat and cannot eat, and some would eat that want it. But we have meat and we can eat, and so the Lord be thanked. Now, I was thinking of that, poem, and as a minister, I'm always thinking about how congregations work, a fully functioning or healthy congregation. And so I decided that I would try to paraphrase Burns. And I'll close with my paraphrase. You might call it a Sears variation on the Selkirk Grace, or Sears variation on Burns. And to me, this captures the essence of a healthy congregation, one that provides opportunities for people to grow and to nourish their souls, and opportunities for people to participate, to know that you're doing something good, to tilt the axis of the world in the direction of compassion and hope. Some would participate if they could congregate. Others congregate but will not participate. But we congregate and we participate, and so the Lord be thanked. So be it, and thank you for listening.
We now come to a particularly important part of the service, because the offering today will all be directed to refugee support for people suffering in Ukraine. Here we see a chance to refute any hint of predestination. We can decide how much we wish to give, and we can exercise a call to our humanity as we do so. All contributions to the plate this Sunday will be given to the International Rescue Committee, a 501c3 organization, unless you otherwise indicate. If you write a check, make it payable to Albany UU with, quote, partner church or refugee support on the memo line. Checks for your pledge should be made payable to Albany UU and say pledge on the memo line. Envelopes are be available for cash distributions if you wish to write upon those. And if you are donating, and for those who are donating online, there's a specific box to check labeled refugee relief. If you're donating for the, by text, you can follow the instructions on the following slide. And as I say, our donations will all be directed to refugee relief. There's the slide for those who wish to make donations by texting or through the URL. We must now say goodbye to our Facebook friends. Consider joining us on Zoom next week or visit us at 405 Washington Avenue in Albany. You can find more information at our website, albanyuu.org. Our offertory music this morning is a little tune you've heard reference made earlier, Auld Lang Syne, a Scottish folk tune with lyrics by Robbie Burns, and it will be presented by Elena Karpov. We enjoy welcoming guests and visitors to our service. If you'd like to tell us who you are and where you're from, those here in Community Hall should stand or raise your hand, and Chuck will bring you the microphone so everyone can hear you. Those joining us on Zoom can click on the raise hand symbol, which you'll find either in the participant window or the reactions button on your Zoom toolbar. Our technician, Kate, will invite you to unmute and introduce yourself. You may also, or instead, click on the visitor link you'll find in the clear window. Let's have Chuck go first. If anybody's there, you have a hand.
Hello everyone, lovely to see you all. I am introducing my friend Carolyn Christie with her husband Jack, and they're up in the early class, but she's new, so.
Welcome. Kate, have we anyone on Zoom? Nothing, okay. Well, thank you and welcome to all who have joined us today. If you'd like to learn more about our congregation or Unitarian Universalism in general, you can stop by the table in the lobby and speak to our friendly welcome table host. Or if you're joining us on Zoom today, you can find in the participant window Barb or Amy who have welcome before their name. You can reach out to her privately in the chat window now or after the service. Select a stone on behalf of those joys and sorrows that are left unspoken. Let us hold all we have heard and felt in our hearts. We will now have a last hymn called Abide With Me by William Henry Monk. The words are by Henry Francis Light, and the song leader Elena Karpov.
As we move forward from this place, let us carry the love and dedication to improving our world with us. Go forward in love, go forward in hope, go forward together. Amen. Blessed be, so be it.
Today, we wish to thank our musician, Elena Karpov, our ushers, Chuck Manning, Kathy Harris, Christian Abbas, and Jean Poppy. Our pastoral care associates on duty today were Annie Lipinski and Randy Rosette. I, John Newell, am your service associate. Our welcomers were Barb Manning and Amy Lint. Our greeter was Kathy Hodges. Our office support today was obtained from Tammy Goddard and Patience Pichette. Technical support by Kate Pierce and Fred Ames. Our flowers were given and arranged by Barb and Dave Metz for all the Unitarians in Hope. And I wish also to acknowledge the great work of the chair of the Religious Services Committee, Don Dana, who puts together the script, plans, and all the other backstory for our religious services. We have the following announcements today. A reminder that donations for support today will support refugees are being accepted at Albany U. You put partner church or refugee support on a memo of your check. Funds will be held for the partner church designated fund until they are sent to the International Rescue Committee. The Green Sanctuary Committee will be meeting today at 11:30 on, like about a minute ago, on Zoom, and are welcome and encouraged to join. Contact Chuck Manning at the link for Chuck Manning at hotmail.com. Thank you for your continued support for Albany UU. A reminder that our stewardship campaign, Renewing Our Community Commitment, Reviewing and Community, has been officially begun. Many thanks to all who submitted their pledge. For those who haven't yet, pledges need to be returned by April 10th. Please remember to include your UU Bucks raffle ticket when you return your pledge. Sesquicentennial quilt discussion will be held by the Inclusivity team, has informed the board that the Ministry and Operations team that the sesquicentennial quilt, lovingly created by members of our congregation 30 years ago, no longer supports our vision of being an inclusive, welcoming congregation. Join us on Sunday, March 27th at 11:30 for a discussion to learn more. To receive the Albany UU news, contact Tammy Goddard at admin@albanyuu.org.